Hello everyone and welcome, and a very big welcome to Victor. Urrutia, is the fifth generation from a family that founded CVNE 141 years ago. It's a very special company, all sorts of pioneering activities. And I thought I'd look, rather than the standard biographies that we're finding at the moment, I got my copy of John Radford. Members will remember John Radford as a great expert on Spain and a member of the Circle. And just a few words from what he said about CVNE in his 1998, The New Spain. He said simply, "This represents much of what is best practice in modern Rioja." And so Victor's going to tell us about that, and also a little about Rioja in the CVNE in the general situation in Rioja. So over to you, Victor.
Liz, thank you very much for the introduction, and thank you for remembering John. He was a dear friend, and as we've been very lucky to have many people from the UK, from England, who've been our friends over the years. So we're very fortunate to have that. Good afternoon to you all, ladies and gentlemen. As Liz said, my name is Victor Urrutia, and I have been running CVNE for about 17, 18 years. We're very proud to be a family winery from Spain. And what I've done is I've put together some pictures and so on to share with you. So can you see that properly? I'm terrible with technology, so you'll have to bear with me with that. So what you see at the background here is the Castle of Davaliyo, which is our spiritual home in Rioja. And in fact, it belonged to a distant relative, and we formalized the purchase of the castle only, I think it was last year or several months ago. And one thing that we lack in Rioja is icons that define us and who we are. There's very few wine regions, I think, in the world that have very clear iconic images that represent them. And this is one of ours. And I think it's important that we open it. We're going to restore the castle. It's been closed and run down for decades. And we're in the process of restoring it now. And so you could see it and visit it. And basically know more about our region, which I think is a region, many of you know it and many of you have written about it. I'm thinking specifically of Stephen, who has been a dear friend of our house and Spain for many years. But in the general picture of things, I think Rioja is still relatively unknown. So anything that you can do to help us spread the word is very welcome. Okay, so CVNE. CVNE is actually an acronym. It stands for Wine Company from the North of Spain. It's a bit of a mouthful, and it's not an easy name to pronounce. But I sort of like the fact that it is an anonymous name, because what this means is that from one generation to another, the change should not be important. And I often think of many vineyards that were created by a person, usually a great person, that creates a winery or a vineyard and does everything and names it after him. And once that person retires or passes away, often it's very hard to step into those shoes and to succeed and keep everything going. In our case, that doesn't really happen at all. It's an anonymous company, it's family, but it's not a one man's project. So I'm here rambling on about us now, but hopefully in 20, 30 years, there'll be somebody else, hopefully from my family, doing the same thing, and it shouldn't be too different. That is the idea, that is what we want. So we were founded in 1879. I think this picture is a bit more recent than that, but the general scenario that we have at the winery hasn't really changed that much. It's actually quite unique in Spain to have wineries in the same family for as long as we have been around. I think in Rioja, it's just us and Lopez Heredia that have been around in the same family for as long. There's more family wineries in the south, in Sherry, but in general, Spain is, we have to recognize the fact that our country has been somewhat backward, at least far more backward than France or Italy, and that we haven't really had what you would call modern enterprises of businesses around for that long. So I think it's remarkable. We're not big, and we're certainly not large and very profitable or anything like that, but we have been around for a long time, and we're proud of this. Perhaps because we haven't been profitable or very successful, we have been around for so long. So there's a blessing there somehow. Here's a little snapshot of the different generations that we've had in the company, what each brought to the well, I suppose to the firm. Currently, it's just me and my sister, part of the 5th generation. I've been here for about 20 years. Before that, it was my uncle Luis, who retired in 2003. People often ask me, did you expect to be running CUNE all your life? And the answer is no. I had no idea that I'd be running CUNE. I thought there was others in the family who could do a better job than me, or just others in general, just plenty of us here. But for whatever reason, I was asked to take over the company in 2003, and I only agreed to do it for a year or so. One thing led to another, and I continued after that, and well, here we are. I like to think of ourselves as ambassadors for Spain. Often, when I talk to my colleagues in other wineries, and or more to the point, when I see them presenting themselves and their wines, I always see them starting talking about themselves and about their families. And then they will talk about their vineyards, their wines, and the villages where they are at. And at some point, they might end up talking about their country. More often than not, they'll just stick to their region and not do more talking than that. And I do the opposite. I start with Spain. I start with our country, because the fact remains, most of the people that I present our wines to, or our company to, they don't really know too much either about our wines, our company, or our country. If you go to America and you start talking about different regions in Spain, chances are they have no idea what you're talking about. So just pinpointing Spain, to me, is very important. And the fact that our symbol is Spanish, the flag is Spain, to me, is very important. I think this is remarkable. I think we are the only company in Spain that has our flag as our symbol. I think it's a shame that others don't do it. I think the airline Iberia at some point had it. They had the crown and Spain's flag, but they took it away. And it's not even a Spanish company now, part of Shell. So I think it's a shame that there's not more pride in our country, in what we have and who we are. So to me, it's a big point to fly the flag for our country and to represent it, even if we sort of leave to the side the family behind us. I think that's actually less important. I also like to think that Imperial is the wine from Spain. Of course, every winery in Spain probably feels the same way in some about their wines. But I'm very proud of this wine of ours. It was served at the King of Spain's wedding, and anyway, it's something we're very proud of. Here's a nice picture of one of our vineyards that you can see behind in June. I think I took this picture June last year. So where are we in Spain? We have 4 estates in Rioja, and we also have different properties across the country. And I'll tell you a little about each one as we move along the presentation. Often when people think of Spain in terms of wine, they think of wines from the Mediterranean, and we don't really do that. We have some cava, some sparkling wine from Barcelona, but we don't have any wines from the Mediterranean coast. Certainly nothing from the south, nothing from these powerful reds. And it's, again, this doesn't really apply to the UK, but often in America or Latin America, when people think of Spanish wines, they immediately think of very powerful, broody, alcoholic wines, you know, with big busty tannins and high alcohols. But we actually do the opposite. We try to do wines that are more delicate and that are lighter. It's not really our thing. It's a shame, actually, we can't tasting some wines right now. Here's a nice little drawing. I think it was done by a child, not one of mine, but somebody's in the family, of our different properties. Rioja is actually very pleasant on the eye. It has a river that runs through it. It's the River Ebro. It starts near the Atlantic and it flows through Rioja and ends up in the Mediterranean in Tarragona. Rioja really, it's classified into three different regions. There's Rioja Alta, which is in the northern part of the region with the mountains. There's Rioja Alavesa, which is part of the Basque Country, slightly to the east. And then there's Rioja Baja. They've just changed the name now. They call it Rioja Oriental. I think it doesn't really add much in any way. But anyway, that's the decision they made. And this is possibly the least interesting of the Riojan regions. We don't produce wines there. It's the climate there is Mediterranean, whereas where we have our vineyards and wineries, it's continental. Here's a picture of our cellars in Aro. We like to think of ourselves as the most important premium winery in Rioja. Maybe this is it's a lofty claim, and I'm sure others have similar claims. But I think we have a lot going for us. We have about 600 hectares in property, which I think for any state in Europe is remarkable. These in countless plots, well not countless, but in many different plots, all of them in what we consider the best villages of Rioja. I don't think anybody owns as many vineyards as we do. We, in terms of revenue, for those that have financial considerations in their mind, I think we sell more than any other family wineries in Rioja. We were the first winery in Spain to have 100 bunker points for a red and also a white wine. This we're very proud. I realize that these things are less and less important. But for what it's worth, I think points is something that people, whether you like it or not, they like to relate to. It's all a competition nowadays, isn't it, about where you stand in ranking. I wish we could avoid it, but sadly it's part of modern life. And also another thing that we're very proud of is that we're the only Spanish winery so far to have been #1 wine for wines in the US. Now, you could argue whether one magazine is better than another and so on. But to me, this was important because in Spain, we've always had, I don't know if I would call it an inferiority complex, but we've always felt that we weren't as good as the best from Bordeaux and Burgundy. We always felt that we were below them. And I don't speak for Cunet wines, I speak for the best that Spain can produce. And undoubtedly, Bordeaux and Burgundy have reputations that are far stronger than anything that we might have in Spain. But on a good day, I think that our best wines can be as good as the best from Bordeaux and Burgundy. I often use football similes. I think that might work with my kids, but I won't bore you with that now. But you know, on a good day, we can do that. It can be as good as the best from France. I'm convinced of this. Yeah. Some of our top wines from Rioja, some wines from Riyadh, some wines from Ribera, we could do it. And in the past, we didn't believe this. And now we do. And I think it's very important. Let me tell you a little about our different wines. Cunet is...
It's a nice wine, but it's...
I don't know if it's our best known wine, probably, because you can find it. It's the wine, I call this is our Christian wine. As Christians, we want everybody to be Christians. Well, we want everybody to know Cunet and everybody to drink Cunet. And this is the wine that we try and have in shops everywhere. You could see it in England in Waitrose, Cunet Reserva, In the US, we try to have it in as many shops as possible. In Asia as well, we try to have this wine everywhere. It's somebody said to me before, oh, it's a bit like the Coca-Cola symbol. I said, well, actually, I think they copied us because ours is older. We first started making this wine in the 19th century, and I think Coca-Cola, it's a very old brand, but it came after we did. So I don't know, maybe they copied us as well. But there's certainly something to the curly letters that make them pleasant on the eye and easy to recognize when you're looking at them in a store. Certainly you can find them everywhere in Spain. This is possibly Spain's best known wine. I think we're proud of the fact that you can find it across pretty much all Spanish restaurants and bars. Of course, most of them are shut now because of COVID. I hope I've managed to avoid talking about COVID so far now. It's a terrible subject, isn't it? As soon as all conversations now seem to be preceded by COVID, I will leave it at that and not go into that anymore. So here you go, Cune. It was actually, just as a little anecdote, Cune is an acronym for the company. It's Compañía Vinícola del Norte de España, wine company from the north.
So I basically worked out
So it really should be with
flights again. I heard the hotel's still available. The best
with a V instead of with a U. But we asked. I've been told this story by my grandfathers. Their grandfathers. They asked somebody in Spain, in Rioja, to produce them a label or to produce them a commercial brand, and they told them, well, this is our initial CVNE. I thought, well, you can't pronounce that. You can't pronounce a V. Surely it must be a U. So they did the symbol with a U, and said, oh, you got it wrong. It should be a V, not a U, but it actually sounds okay and it looks okay. So let's just go with it. So it was a happy mistake, and it's become what we have now as Cune. Possibly our best known wine, rather than the one that we sell most of, is Imperial. Some people call it Imperial. We prefer to use the Spanish phrase, which is Imperial. This wine, it was first produced, the first vintage is in fact 1917, it was released in the 20s. And it was, I think until then, until those years, we basically just tried to do wine every year as best as we could without really thinking about let's do something special. And of course, everybody does that nowadays. You do a wine to the best of your knowledge and abilities, and then you do something very special. In the past, people didn't do that. So this is sort of our super Rioja. This was only produced in vintages that we thought were excellent, and we stayed true to that. We skipped it in, well, let me see. We skipped it in 92, 93, 97, 2003, 2006. We skipped in 2013. And so, you know, we don't do it every year. You know, we actually do this. It's a bit of a headache for us because quite a few years we just don't produce this wine at all. And it's really the soul of the company. It's the wine we're very proud of. And you can find it in different shops in the UK and different restaurants, and in Spain also in what we'd like to consider as smarter restaurants. This is a picture here, the photo here is of a cellar that was designed by Eiffel himself back in the 19th century. We have the invoices and the correspondence and so on. It doesn't seem like much, but of course in those days you have to realize that in Spain people were moving around on horseback or on donkey back, and to have a big cellar without any columns holding everything together with basically metal trusses, as you can see, keeping the ceiling from falling down, was quite nothing short of revolutionary for us in those days. So also something that we're very proud of. Viña Real. The building is modern because we basically had no space for it in its original cellars, and we decided to build a modern building to house Viña Real. We started doing this about 20 years ago. But in fact, the wine itself has been around since the 20s. And to me, this represents the epitome of Rioja Alavesa. People often ask me, well, what is the difference between Alavesa and Rioja Alta? Now, it's a shame that we can't have wines to taste right now to talk a bit more about this. But I like to think that Viña Real is more Burgundian in the sense that wines are more gastronomic. The less acidic. If Rioja Alta, if Imperial is slightly leaner, this will be fuller if you want, and meant to be drunk with all our wines are meant to be drunk with food, but this one is just, I think, more food friendly. I'm a huge fan of wines from Rioja Alavesa, the proper ones, the good ones that have been around forever. Contino, this is another of our properties. This was, in fact, is the first single vineyard in Rioja, founded in '73, which for us makes it quite a new project. 60 odd hectares in a meander of the River Ebro, also in Alavesa. These wines, all our wines are made in the same way. They're all vinified in the same way. They're all mostly Tempranillo, but the end result is different. And I think that is I mean, it's obvious. It's the end result of the actual vineyard itself, of the soil and the weather and the orientation of the vineyards, the terroir that is bandied about by everybody. But as a point of fact, the wines are different. Contino wines are more powerful than Viña Reals, even though the two properties are right next to each other. And they all last for a long time, but they're more concentrated. This is another, I remember a famous visit with Stephen about 10 years ago to the Contino cellars, ended up singing one part of the cellar to another. So it was a brilliant visit. Monopole is another of our wines. It's very nice. What I want to show you are our new things that perhaps you don't know about. Bella. Bella is, stealing names again from you, Stephen. I keep referencing you, but you keep coming up. This name might ring a bell to you. This is a property that we have in Ribera del Duero. It's 70 odd hectares. The vineyards were planted about 30 years ago. The building itself is new, as you can see from the picture. And it's also a single vineyard. And what we achieve here, what we strive for rather, is to bring our take on Riojan elegance to this very rugged region. Ribera can produce great wines, but these wines are often very powerful. They're very tannic, and they're powerful wines. They're made in a rugged climate. Temperatures in winter can drop to minus 10 degrees, and in the summer they can get very hot as well. So it's very extreme climate. The elevation is super high. This vineyard is nearly at 850 meters. The elevation's high. All in all, it's a very dramatic vineyard and a very dramatic countryside. This is a mouthful, Virgen del Galir, the Virgin of the Galir. This is a new property of ours in Valdeorras. Valdeorras is the home of Godello. Godello is an ancient variety that people don't know too much about, but I'm a huge fan of Godello. It's, I think, from aesthetically and from a taste profile, it's a cousin of Chardonnay. It's powerful. It results in wines that can be not heavy on acidity, but big and powerful. And Galicia is the place, I think, for white wines from Spain right now. People know a lot about Albariños, and they are the opposite of this. If Albariños could remind people of Rieslings, again, Godellos can remind people of Chardonnays. Both come from the same region, very different in taste profile. Let me show you some more pictures of Galir, because it really is, it's a beautiful countryside. I hope you could see this. This is one of our vineyards that we have in Valdeorras. We have about 22 hectares planted here, and we're in the process of planting another 10. Our objective is to get to 40 hectares and then stop. That is more than enough. And this is an amphitheater that drops down. It has a 25 degree inclination all the way down. So it's quite steep. And I think this is, to me, this is what Galicia is about. The scenery is unchanged. This picture could have been taken 100 years ago. It would be exactly the same. This, because we're far away from the coast and far away from anything really, the area has been undeveloped, and that is its charm and its beauty. It was extremely poor in the past. Most farming was subsistence, and as a result of that, a lot of the vineyards were never grubbed up. These were planted in the 40s. The varieties here are a combination. There's some Godello, there's Mencia, which is red. There's some Palomino from Jerez, from sherry, which somehow ended up here. It's a field blend, and we produce whites and we produce reds here. As you can see, the soil is granite. Ignore the fool here in the middle of the picture. If I zoom to the back, you could see there's a church at the back. It's actually a monastery. It's called the Sanctuary of the Eremitas, of the Hermitage. We can't use that name nowadays. It's been used too much. But as you can see, it's a delightful place that has been untouched by modernity. It's basically escaped unscathed from the ravages of modernity. This is a picture of the vineyard in winter before we bought it. They used herbicides, as you can see. We stopped doing that now, and we've eradicated them. But as you can see, you can only access this by either by horseback or on donkey. There's just no way you could even consider mechanizing this. And the harvest is a nightmare. But in a sense, this is what has saved these vineyards. Otherwise, they would have been grubbed up and planted for something fashionable, something easy to cultivate. You can see the terraces, they were built in the 19th century, and we think the vineyard was planted in the 40s. So that is it from me. I think I've spoken enough. I don't know if I've overdone my time or underdone it, but I've tried to give you a snapshot of who we are, some of our wines, and some of our latest projects. What I urge you all, and I will talk to my importer, to Hatch Mansfield, to Patrick, and to Rosa, to Rosamund at our communication agency, to encourage you to come and see us. It would be absolutely lovely if the Circle could organise a trip to come and see us. Rioja is the easiest place to come and see because you can fly into Bilbao, one of the French airports in the southwest, and then it's a short drive from there. So please do come and see us, and we can at least have some wine together and see if I've been talking complete nonsense or if the wines are in fact any good at all. So over to you, Andrea, Liz.
Thanks, Victor. Richard needs to go a bit earlier, so Richard, can you just unmute yourself and ask your question? I'm struggling to unmute you. No. Richard. Okay, I'll ask the question in that case. Richard wants to know, I'm sorry, let me just get to it. The question concerns Tempranillo. Is there too much of it in Rioja? And shouldn't there be more Garnacha as in the old days, especially given global warming? And then how do Kunen ensure quality of the Tempranillo fruit and wine? So it's really three questions there for you, Victor.
Those are good questions. In the past, there used to be far more Grenache or Garnacha in Rioja than there is nowadays. And that is a shame. I'm a huge fan of Grenache. We have some Grenache in Contino that we bottle separately, and it's a delicious, it's a savory, delicious wine. Grenache is also very good with the heat, and I think it makes a lot of sense that new plantings in Rioja should be to Grenache as opposed to Tempranillo. But I have to say, I'm a big fan of Tempranillo. Tempranillo has always been the backbone and the majority of the fruit that goes into all our top wines. And that's been the case. I've tasted all our wines going back to the 19th century, and we don't have notes on all our wines, but of those that we do have, it's always Tempranillo, the majority of what we had there. So I think we're okay there, yeah. But I agree with his point. I think Grenache and Garnacha are the excellent varieties, particularly for climate change. They can survive very well with the heat and with the drought. How do we ensure quality of our Tempranillo, of our fruit? I think the only answer to that, the only thorough answer to that, is that the only way you can ensure quality is by having your own vineyards. To me, that is, call me a control freak if you want, but if you have your own vineyards, you have control over the one thing that I think is the most important factor when it comes to fruit quality, which is the date that you harvest. If it's somebody else doing it, it's out of your hands. Of course, the quality of what you planted, the vineyard itself, where it's at, these are all key factors. But if you have to choose one thing, it's the day you harvest. And if it's yours, it's in your hands when you do that. Other than the other 100 things that you need to do during the year to make sure that you have a quality product. So we've actually bought, I think, about 150 hectares since I've been here at Cune. And our idea is to continue doing so. I think the more you have, the better. So that's, to me, I'm adamant about that. I'm actually seeing a question here, which I like, that about strict laws limiting the use of national flags in corporate logos. I think it's a brilliant question. And I have a letter from the royal household from the 19th century authorizing us to use the Spanish flag as our symbol. You could argue that that is no longer valid, but we will stick to our guns and use it if anybody says anything against it. So I have some pictures here when we went to visit the King of Spain last year to give him his annual case of Imperial, and he was very proud of the Spanish flag. So I think we're okay in that sense. But also, again, it's a shame that more people don't use the Spanish flag. I wish they did.
Thanks, Victor. Then Christos is just reminding us of a BA flight to Bilbao, but it's not possible at the moment.
Yes, I think we have to wait a bit until COVID goes away and flights are back. For the time being, I think we have to wait on that visit. But I'm thinking spring 2021 is a brilliant time for you all to come and visit.
I'll put it in my diary so long.
There you go.
And Heather has a question. Heather, do you want to unmute yourself? Heather?
Yeah.
There you are.
Hi. I have a couple of questions, Victor. So we're just talking about varieties, and I wonder if you have any plans to plant Maturana Tinta, one of the sort of more newly authorized varieties.
We thought about it. We've seen some in Rioja. Some of the actual Maturana Tinta that I've seen in Rioja, actually Merenzal from Galicia and from Portugal. So there's some confusion with regards to what the actual Maturana Tinta is. I think it's interesting, and I'm all for planting things that have been around for Rioja historically. I don't have a problem with that at all, and I'm always happy to experiment. I think it's what we should all be doing. What I am against is planting foreign varietals that have never been there and that have no place there. I'm thinking Merlot, I'm thinking Cabernet Sauvignon, Sauvignon Blanc, Verdejo. I think these varieties, international varieties, they might actually work in Rioja. I have no question about that. But from a commercial point of view, would it be interesting? Would it be compelling? I don't think so. I think there's people in the New World doing a far better job of replanting or sort of doing new things with those. And of course, there's the original vineyards planted through those varieties in France or elsewhere in Spain that will do a far better job of it. So I think you need to stick to what you know what to do. You need to. It's the same as with cuisine. Yeah, if you're a Catalan cook and you do Catalan cooking, excel at that. By all means, do different things, but then you won't be a Catalan cook doing Catalan food. Yeah? You'll be doing something else. I think sticking to your guns is a good idea, and I'm all in favour of doing that.
Yeah, I agree with you on the international varieties.
Yeah.
And I had a second question about your estate in Ribera del Duero.
Yes.
So you talked about bringing Riojan elegance to this rugged region. Is there a sort of two-way exchange? Are you finding lessons from Ribera that you're then able to bring back to Rioja?
Not yet, and I don't want to sound arrogant. Of course, there must be things that we can learn there, yeah? But we haven't been there long enough to learn these things. One of the things, actually, but there is one specific point that I think we have to learn a lot about, and that's dealing with frost. Now, Ribera, they get a lot of frost. It's because it has the extreme. It's a meseta in Spain. It's so high up. The altitude is so high as well. And when you look at vineyards to buy, the first thing you need to check in Ribera is how prone are they to frost. And I think the good vineyards in Ribera are the ones that don't frost over normally. But dealing with frost is something they live with all the time. And in Rioja, it's not common at all. It wasn't in the past, but it's becoming more and more common. And that is one specific thing that we can learn a lot from, sadly, but something we're going to have to learn.
Thank you.
Thanks. And then Ellen from Switzerland wants to ask you something, Victor.
Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you fine.
Okay, good, because I just got a message saying my internet connection is unstable. Which
No, that's fine. That's
good timing. I live in Switzerland. I write in English, however, for the international audience in Switzerland, if you like. And so I have for the past 5 or 6 years gone to the annual presentation of Rioja wines in Zurich. And what we're hearing more about is the push to diversify and have more whites. And so I would really like your opinion about whether or not this is actually working. I've had some lovely whites that I tasted there, but you know, if I talk to people about Rioja wines, red automatically comes to mind. So
yeah,
this is work.
It's funny that, you know, because you're absolutely right. When people think of Rioja, they think of reds. But in fact, in the past, we at Cune, even in the 60s, in the 1960s, we produced just as much red as we did white. So we've always been a white wine house. It's just that over the years, whites became less trendy and reds became more popular for us in Rioja and in Spain. And we produced more red and less white. But in fact, our legacy is more to do with whites. Switzerland is a huge market for whites, but of course for its own whites. There's such a huge culture for the fondants and Caselas in general that there's not really that much room, I think, for whites from Spain. But there is a gap, and I'm a huge believer in whites from Spain, from Galicia, as I mentioned before. I think Godello is really the next thing in Spain, and it's becoming super popular here. So I think it's going to be a question of time before you see more Godellos everywhere in Europe and in England and elsewhere. I think that's happening already, and it's going to happen much more. But also from Rioja, we produced a white. I showed you a picture before of called Monopole. There's just no way you could register that name nowadays. But we've been producing Monopole since 1915, and in fact, I haven't told anyone about this yet, but we plan to release a Monopole Grand Reserva sometime next year. And this is a white that has been aged in barrels, in used barrels, for nearly 6 years, which is how we did it way back in the past. In fact, we did it for less time than that, but we thought, why not? And it's an extraordinary wine. And I can't wait to taste it with all of you. And it's been in barrel. As I said, it's going to be the 2014 vintage. It will have been in barrel for nearly 6 years and in bottle for about a year. And it's going to be another of our Grand Reserva wines. And most people think, what, you know, a white Rioja, not really interested. A Grand Reserva white Rioja, it's just no way I want to taste it. And in our case, this wine actually has some sherry blended into it. It's how we did it in the past. Give it a bit more pepper. So it's just, most people are going to think, well, you know, there's just no way I'm drinking that. It's just too weird and too different. But it's something that we have been producing since way back in the day. We stopped doing for a long time, and we're bringing it back now. And we're bringing it back as a Grand Reserva. I think and to me, that is the epitome of what can be produced in Rioja. So it's something really proud of, super excited about, very interesting wine, very, very small amounts, but something that will really fly the flag for quality Spain. So there you go.
Okay.
I hope you like it
forward to that.
when you taste it. Yes.
And Liz wants to ask a question, please.
Yes. First of all, I've tasted Monopole. I think it was a vintage from the 1950s. It was extraordinary. It's the oldest white Spanish wine I'd ever tasted.
Wow.
And it was fabulous.
Thank you.
But my question is to do with reds. For consumers who aren't terribly well informed about Rioja, it's a bit confusing because there are very different styles. There are the modern styles, and certainly down at the lower price ends, they're not actually that distinctive. And then you get the traditional ones where with American oak with different flavors. Is there any effort to try to explain this to consumers more, or encourage them in one direction or another?
The trouble is, we're quite chaotic in Spain, as I'm sure you'll know, or you've all experienced when you come to our country. So to have something that is clearly organized and set out, that's just too Napoleonic for us. It's just not us. Okay, we're not good at that. To me, and I appreciate it, I acknowledge it can be hard for somebody that doesn't know Rioja to go about it, because it's confusing. What I find, I use an example. I use Champagne, which is far better known than Rioja. And when you drink Champagne, you could see brands that are not well known, and it's the wines that the supermarkets are selling to you at cheaper prices, and you probably know that those are the champagnes to avoid. It's not going to be very good, and so don't drink it. So there's those out of the way. Then you have sort of the grand marque, the brands that you recognize and know, and you also have those in Rioja. But Puna is a good example. There's others that have been around for a long time. These are brands that people sort of recognize and know, and within that, there's three styles of wines that stand out. One is Crianza. Crianza means it's aged in barrel for a year. And I assimilate this to non-vintage champagne. You see a bottle of Veuve Clicquot, non-vintage, you sort of know what to expect there. Not all the bottles are going to be the same, of course, they will change, but they're within certain parameters. And with Rioja Crianza, although it has a vintage to it, you sort of look for that as well. We have a house style, and the quality of the wine can never be below a certain level. But that's on the floor, but on the top, it's going to have a certain ceiling as well, because if it's better than that, it will become a reserve wine. It's going to be at a certain quality level, and it will stick with them. So like non-vintage champagne. Then on top of that, you have Reserva, which means that the wine has spent longer in barrel and longer in bottle. So the vintage will typically be older, and the quality of the wine and the fruit should be higher. With us, it's certainly the case. And again, to use a champagne comparison, you see the bottle of the Veuve Clicquot, you will see the non-vintage, and next to it at a higher price, you will see the vintage, and you assume that the vintage will be better. In our case, the Reserva will have to be better than the Crianza. And the third level is going to be the Grand Reserve. Now, we produce 4 Grand Reserves. Each of our Rioja estates, we produce a Grand Reserve wine. The minimum requirement here for aging the wine is 2 years in barrel and 3 years in bottle. But again, that's just too much detail. Even we forget about it sometimes. I think what you should just bear in mind is the fruit is better, and it spends longer in wood and longer in bottle. Again, if we go back to Champagne, this would be the special cuvee that the house would have. So it would be the Krug cuvee. I don't know if they have a special cuvee right at the top of my mind. I don't know if they have it, but it would be the level of quality above the vintage wine, or it would be the single vineyard that they have in their production. So I don't know if this is helpful or not, but really that's sort of, in my mind, that's the scheme that people should have when they think about Rioja. A brand that you recognize. If the word Rioja is bigger than the brand, then maybe it's not that good, because they're relying more on Rioja than themselves to sell it. I think house reputations are important, as they are in Champagne. So focus on that as well. And then Crianza, Reserva, Grand Reserve. Now, of course, if you've done that and you recognize that and you want to dive deeper, then you need to find special smaller producers that probably don't bother with Crianza or Reserva, Grand Reserva. Hopefully they're single vineyards. This happens in Champagne as well. You find a particular grower from a certain village that has their own vineyard, and probably in the past they were selling the fruit to somebody, and now they decided to vinify themselves and do the élevage themselves. And it could be good, not necessarily the case. And there's those in Rioja as well. So it's a big region with many different things going on.
Thank you.
I don't know if I answered the question. I gave them my best shot.
Thanks, Victor. Are there any other questions at this time? Well, then I'm going to wrap it up here and just say thank you very, very much, Victor. I learned a lot, as I always do with these presentations, and it's so lovely to actually see somebody who's in the area doing the presentation and telling us about real experiences. So thank you for the invitation.
You're very kind.
We've all made
Thank you very much. Please do all write that down, and it would be lovely to host you with that proper face-to-face communications and conversations and actual wine to be shared. That would be absolutely lovely. So spring 2021 would be a brilliant time for us to do this.
No.
So,
thank you very much for your time, and thank you everybody else for joining us, and we'll see you next time for the other side of the continent in China.